the results can be much less positive and much less impactful to the society that we live in.
Yeah, there can be a lot of roadblocks there. Yeah. So how often do you think these things work quite well, right? So where you've got that right personality together, you think most of the people who are searching out and most of the departments who look for these partnerships sort of know what they're getting into and doing it and they're ready?
Something to Chew On is a podcast devoted to the exploration and discussion of global food systems. It's produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University. I'm Maureen Olevnik, Coordinator of Global Food Systems.
I'm Scott Denona. I'm a philosopher of science.
And I'm John Fabian. I'm a food scientist.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Global Food Systems podcast, Something to Chew On. Food system professionals are trained to study and better understand many aspects of the food we eat. Production, nutrition, logistics, ethics, social implications, and sustainability all play an important part. However, an underlying need in the understanding of a food system begins with fundamental science. It is that research that provides the foundational building blocks for understanding food science. In this podcast, we talk with Dr. Gordon Smith, Professor and Department Head in the Department of Grain Science and Industry, and Director of the KSU International Grains Program. Gordon is a chemist by training, and with a deep understanding of the science and interest in its applications, those fundamentals led him to work in commercial food safety, large-scale production of meats and bakery goods, as well as processing of fruits and vegetables. Prior to coming to K-State, Gordon worked at the intersection of industrial and academic research and product development with Conagra Foods, Sara Lee, and other food industry manufacturers.
Gordon, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited about bringing someone in from my home department at Kansas State University. I spent many, many years working on my master's and PhD in the grain science department, and it's really a special pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Gordon Smith and share more about him and the programs currently carried out in the Department of Grain Science and Industry. Gordon, can you give us a little background on yourself, how you ended up studying chemistry and how that all led you to the food industry?
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure. We do have a unique situation here within the Department of K-State, and I'm looking forward to telling your audience about that. And so for my background, I was raised as the son of a college professor. And what that means, among other things, is you're exposed to college professors from a very young age, and that you live in college towns. And so I was born in Pullman, Washington, moved to Corvallis, Oregon, to Oregon State, and then to the University of Tennessee, where my father retired after 25 or 30 years. And so, I guess I was raised as a purebred academic. Education was important. Science was important. I was in the laboratories, as young as I can remember, 5 or 6 with my dad. And that translated kind of in high school over to a love of chemistry, thanks to a just phenomenal high school chemistry teacher. I had a great teacher in high school. I had great teachers in college, and it translated into a love of chemistry that continued on through my master's. And so I have a master's in organic chemistry. Then I moved to the more applied side of things and have a PhD in food chemistry and food science. That led me in the beginning to make the conscious choice not to be an academic, because I saw, kind of the life of my dad, and I wanted to do something a little bit different, but with a love for academia. And so I spent 25 years in the food industry, and then almost 6 years ago made the move back to academia, and it's been a terrific ride from graduate school or undergraduate to this point forward. It's just been a terrific adventure, and I've really been quite tickled that I chose science and that I chose food science in specific.
That's great. When I look through, and actually I've known you for many years now, and looking back, your background is in meat science more than in grain science. Can you talk a bit about that background and the work that you did over the years in the meat area, and kind of how you transitioned out of that into the grains and the milling and baking side of things?
Yeah, funny. I would, the way I think about myself is my background is I'm really a chemist first and foremost. And chemistry is chemistry regardless of what the substrate is or the discipline or the food type. And so I always prided myself in having a very strong fundamental chemistry background. And it just so happened, that I went to the meat science section within the animal science department at Texas A&M to get my PhD, but my PhD was in food science, even though I was embedded in a meats group. And the specific area of my study was meat protein chemistry. And so it's what I'd done in chemistry. It just turned applied. But that, adventure into meat proteins led me into an industry job with Sara Lee, which in the beginning was about meats. So I was hired by the meats group at Sara Lee, which was a massive publicly traded corporation at the time, half non-food and half food. And so, again, obviously most people know the Sara Lee brand, but also Ballpark and Jimmy Dean and Hillshire Farms and products like that, and Champion and Playtex bras and legs and Coach leather and Kiwi shoe polish and on it goes. So, hired by Sara Lee, did pure meats for about 2 or 3 years, and it became obvious again, almost 30 years ago, that what consumers wanted was convenience, convenient nutrition, especially for breakfast. And, what has become commonplace since was not commonplace at all at the time, which was breakfast sandwiches. And so we started working on breakfast sandwiches for the Jimmy Dean brand. I got the opportunity to work for Jimmy specifically, which is really interesting, purebred entrepreneur. But the work on sandwiches put me in a bunch of bakeries, both Sara Lee bakeries and co-packed bakeries, especially around specialty breads. So bagels and baguettes and French toast and pancakes and on it goes, croissants. And so, again, I got a whole lot of specialty baking experience by being responsible for the breakfast sandwiches, initially for Jimmy Dean, but that obviously spread beyond that brand to other Sara Lee brands. But that's how it started. So introduced to bakery goods through sandwiches, and then when I made the move from Sara Lee to ConAgra, then I became truly a food scientist. So I did little meats at ConAgra and did tomatoes and potatoes and popcorn and, on it goes. So not too radical to be here after some of what's happened, since my early career days.
So what's it like to be moving from the different food product areas, right? So from meat to tomatoes and grains. So chemistry is in common between all of these, but tell us something a little bit about what that's like, sort of switching to a different subject area like that.
Yeah, the journey, I think all of us learned at some point, and I certainly learned it younger in life. I like to do challenge sports. I like to mountain climb early on, and what you kind of discover is it's about the journey much more than it is about the summit. Standing on top of a mountain is really rewarding and beautiful and all kinds of things, but the trial to get there is much more meaningful in a lot of ways. And I would tell you that my career has been the same way. It's been about the journey. And I like many academics, am a lifelong learner. I value education, both formal and informal. And I always found the challenge of taking the biology, the chemistry, and the biochemistry that I knew and applying it to something new. Just terrific, really, really rewarding and meaningful. And so, a lot of things you can teach yourself if you have the fundamental, kind of basics, and if you have an environment where learning is critical or important to the business as well. And I was blessed that places I worked valued someone who is capable of becoming technically competent about the new subject areas.
Can you give us a little notion of what the industry experience brought to the academic setting? A lot of times those things are considered quite different from one another, but obviously you've been here for a while now and we're able to bring something to that program that it may not have seen in the past. How does that change work?
Yeah, so, I guess the first kind of caveat is I value both experiences really deeply. And so the industry people think that I'm an academic that played the industry guy, and the academics think I'm an industry person that plays an academic. So I've been a misfit for the majority of my existence. The organic chemist that turned out to be the food scientist. And so I'm used to that, of having an unusual background. And so I love the fact I've been able to do both. And both sides believe they understand the other side first. So industry thinks they understand academia, and academics think they understand industry. And the truth is, unless you've truly lived in both places, while you may intellectually kind of understand what's going on, you certainly have no emotional connection or no, heart connection with what really happens in the other world. Now after nearly 6 years in academia, I'm sort of kind of imagining that I know a little bit about what it's like to be a true academic, but I would say it still will take 4 or 5 more years. It's, again, another journey that's slow to truly, embrace what this is all about. But, the things that are different between the two and what an industry person or an academic can bring to the other world is I had faculty tell me when I first came here they understood industry. And I go, well, I have a litmus test. So my litmus test is, have you ever had a job? And so these are lifetime academics. I go, have you ever had a job when someone could walk in today and fire you on the spot? Go, thanks for your service. We just don't need you anymore. We're not going in that direction. We've sold the business. There are 100 different reasons. But you would go home to your family and not have a job. And to most academics, certainly those who have never been in industry at all, they've never been in a position like that. The system just doesn't work like that. There's more warning. It's a longer term. Those abrupt decisions are just not so commonplace. And so it's difficult to understand the industry until you understand how fragile your position or your existence is, regardless of how good you are. You can be the best there is, and the best rocket scientist on the planet, right to the point where we decide we're not making rockets anymore. And the minute you do that, the need for rocket scientists has gone to zero. And so I think that's this idea of, industry people the business is a kind of fragile world, and it can change really, really quickly. And so when you deal with industry people, you're trying to solve industry problems, and you need to keep those realities in mind. That kind of sense of the business, fragile nature of business, and the sense of urgency that business has. If we don't do it, we're losing money. If we don't do it, we're leaving money on the table. If we don't do it, someone else will do it before us and be the first mover into a new category. And so those are things that, industry person certainly understands they can bring to this environment. Some of the things.
I was just going to ask how much you think that those different kinds of approaches to problems, but shapes the kind of work that's done, like the kinds of problems, the kinds of questions that get asked, or the kinds of solutions that people are looking for. I was wondering if you maybe have, example you can pull out of your hat, or just sort of say something a little bit more about how these different kind of backgrounds and shape what gets done.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And you kind of hear it in some of the pure stereotypes of both groups, like academics like to go deep and it's esoteric and it has no meaning in the real world. And if you can't do, you teach, and all those kind of stereotypical comments about academia. And the inverse for industry people really don't know very much. everything is shallow, everything is fast. They have no interest in the deeper understanding of things. And so, of course, like many things, the stereotypes are based somewhat in reality. And to your question, one of the realities is this idea that because speed, as I talked about earlier, is so critical to business, and it is. And science, in many cases, just isn't fast. No matter how bad you want a cure to the coronavirus, viral cures just take time. They take time to develop. They take time to prove on a small scale. They take time to prove on a larger scale. They take time to develop and essentially send out, execute. And so the speed is what drives not necessarily unwillingness for industry people to want to understand things deeper or better or, more thoroughly. They just simply don't have the time to do it. And funny, what they do have in many cases is the money. So industry scientists have money that academics may never see, yet they have no time, and the academics have the time to understand problems more deeply, but they don't have the funding often to be able to do that. So you're absolutely right. The simple realities, the base constraints of the two environments affect how problems and solutions are developed every day, no doubt about it.
So what happens at the intersection then? So when you've got academics working with industry?
I was talking to a friend of mine a week ago, and there are a number of us who have worked at the intersection most of our lives. So when I worked for Sara Lee, I managed a budget where we were allowed to work with academic and do research with academia. When I moved to ConAgra, that became a more formalized position with a much larger budget. And when I came here, this department, as Maureen well knows, is heavily connected to the industry. So I've had the good fortune to live at the interface. And the answer is the activity at the interface, the productivity, maybe that's even a better word, right? The productivity of the interface depends completely on who the people are who are interacting there. It's all dependent on the attitude and the personalities and the tolerance for looking at problems differently. And if you put the right people at the interface, the results can be spectacular. I have a huge heart for public, private, industry, government, university consortia. I think they can be very, very effective, but it's completely dependent upon the players that are involved. And without the right people and the right attitude and the right respect for others, the results can be much less positive and much less impactful to the society that we live in.
Yeah, there can be a lot of roadblocks there. Yeah. So how often do you think these things work quite well, right? So where you've got that right personality together, you think most of the people who are searching out and most of the departments who look for these partnerships sort of know what they're getting into and doing it and they're ready, or are there a lot of challenges there?
Yeah, I think there are challenges. There are certainly professionals on both sides, people within industry who are very skilled at working with academia and academics who are very skilled with working with industry. And I have some of my favorites. I won't name them, but I mean, there are some people in my mind who are the textbook, academics in my industrial experience, people who provided high value and timely results and insight into our business that we would not have gotten otherwise. So there's no doubt that those people exist on both sides. And there are people on both sides who want to do what they want to do, and they really don't want to be very connected or very inhibited by the constraints that come with projects. And one of the simplest constraints, again, we're back to, you hear the semblance of theme, is time-based. Is in the industry, there's a critical path. There's a development timeline. There are deliverables, certainly, certain times during the month, or monthly deliverables, probably not weekly in many cases. But I mean, there are deliverables. There are things you're expected to accomplish. And again, I didn't say things you were supposed to get done, things you were supposed to accomplish. And so getting to a a point and going, well, I just didn't have time, or my graduate student's on vacation, or the university's closed, is simply an inadequate answer for why the timeline didn't get met. And no one in the industry has any concept of that. They don't have graduate students, they have employees, and the employees are salaried employees and they're being paid to do a job. And it's as simple as that. And so thinking that in either environment is the same across the aisle is not just unfortunate, it's counterproductive. And I've had to, shockingly, I've sat with the CEO of a, gazillions of billions of dollars in earnings company and had to, try to explain why academics were failing to deliver against the time expectations that were agreed upon at the beginning of projects. And that is a very unpleasant situation to be in if you're an industry scientist.
So, Gordon, the grain science department at K-State is unique in a lot of ways. Can you give us a bit of background on the department itself and where you see the unique value and what it offers?
Absolutely. So this is the only department in the country that is kind of comprised and with a mission and the kind of ecosystem to deliver on that mission. So we're one of a kind in this country. There are some international universities that look similar, certainly some universities in China that have patterned with a lot of influence from students back and forth against this department. But essentially, this is a grain products-based department that specifically is the Department of Grain Science and Industry, so it's just not a grain science department. And that an industry is a nod to our reliance and our partnership with industry and everything that we do. And so we look to work with industry professionals as a matter of practice. We try to solve industry problems. We try to be relevant. We try to train students who are prepared for industry jobs, and certainly as undergraduates. And against that, we have we confer 3 degrees. So we actually confer 4 if you count the graduate degree, but we have 3 undergraduate degrees, a BS in bakery science, a BS in milling science, and a BS in feed manufacturing science. And the feed science also in the modern world includes pet food, which is obviously a critical industry in the U.S. and abroad. And so the graduate degrees here are all in grain science, and so there's a number of K-State individuals who are grain scientists with masters and with PhDs, as Marine is one. And they're all over the world. So not just in this country, but the reach is quite impressive. And so with those degrees, you have a department that is kind of unique in its approach to things, and you also have a massive diversity in students. So a feed science student doesn't look like a milling science student. They don't look like a graduate student from Europe or from China or from India working on a grain science degree. And so the diversity in this department, not just within students, but within faculty, is simply incredible. We have the 4 major religious groups represented within faculty. We have 6 different nationalities, again, male and female faculty. These programs, which historically were male dominant, are not male dominant anymore. So, the idea that, if you think about flour millers being male is simply untrue. And so now it more and more looks 50-50 for bakery science students. It's female dominated and has been for a long time. And feed scientists are about half and half. And so, again, it's a very diverse, very interesting group. And unlike almost any other unit at K-State, we compile the industry experience. So if you look at the 18 or 19 faculty members that we have within grain science, we have about 150 years of industry experience. And so the norm here is for high class, high respect academics who also have spent time in the industry. And so we have some purebred academics, but the majority of our faculty has spent time in the industry. And I think that really is good for our students.
What I was just going to mention is the recent seed grant, the Global Food System seed grant programs. There have been a few of those that have been won or provided to some of the folks in your area. Do you want to talk a bit about some of the research activities that are going on in grain science these days? And one of the other questions that I like to throw out there, because I think it's such a critically important piece at this point in time, is the importance of interdisciplinary approaches to tackling some of these problems.
Yeah, exactly. So I will start with any summary of research will be a smattering, and it will undoubtedly leave somebody out. I would refer people to the department's website if they were really interested in a to-date comprehensive review of the research that's going on, because I'll never get all of it. I always get criticized for leaving something out. But a few of the highlights that kind of demonstrate the diversity, if you will, is we have a number of faculty who are experts in a lot of different areas. And so if you look at connectivity to the industry, Dr. Greg Aldridge has been a consultant for the pet food. He's a pet food nutritionist and has been connected to the pet food industry or working for them. He's an old IMS scientist for a number of years. And, you know, he has a large international research group that essentially is plugged into industry-funded products, because there's not a lot of competitive funding for, you know, pet food or pet food science. And so, again, we've kind of become the go-to place for pet food manufacturing and the interface between manufacturing and engineering. I heard another feed science professor, Dr. Chad Polk, had the dissertation defense for his first PhD candidate this morning, and she was working on processing, you know, essentially the impact of processing on enzyme levels and the way that enzymes in feed affect digestibility in poultry feed. And so now that is a more traditional kind of feed science project that ties processing the chemistry or the chemical components of the feed and the nutrition to the animals all into one place. And so, you know, you can go from there to several of our more chemistry, you know, more near and dear to my heart. Yang-Chin Shi and Young-Wei Lee are both chemists. Dr. Shi is a world-renowned starch chemist and one of the best that there is. And he continues to work on modified starch and the impact on product acceptability, quality, nutrition, stability. But he is a, you know, starch modification expert. And as the world moves to a more full, cleaner labels, all natural, then some of the modification technology that has existed in the past becomes less desired by the industry. And all natural, you know, non-chemical sounding, non-complicated starch modification is actually very technically difficult. And then Dr. Lee, again, another chemist, is more of a protein chemist, and he has benefited from some of the seed money grants, but he is working on how you might extract natural antioxidants from either grains or spent grain material. And so, you know, how do you add value? Antioxidants are extremely expensive chemicals. Historically, they've been both natural and chemically made. And so this idea that we could take extracts from grain products is a very natural sort of way of getting to antioxidants, all natural antioxidants and materials. And those are desired greatly by the food industry. And so, you know, again, the kind of basic chemistry. And then we have others working at the interface of flour milling and safety, certainly the E. coli and the salmonella concerns in flour, which are, you know, when Maureen and I were in school, there was zero, you know, and so I say it facetiously, right? There was zero risk of microbial contamination from flour.
Certainly much less focus on it, yeah.
Yeah, and we were taught that. I mean, again, the way I was taught food micro, and the way we were taught it was it's a low water activity, shelf stable, dry, baked, for finished goods, and they're just not much risk. And
Right.
what we've seen is the world we live in constantly surprises us, scientists included. And microorganisms change, and the manufacturing systems change. And so now we have an emerging threat to the industry and a threat to consumers, and that's been met in force by the industry and by the university complexes. And so we have a number of scientists here, Dr. Callie Silveroo, myself, Randy Phoebus in food science, who have a great interest in microbial safety of flour and baked goods. And so we've gotten some good industry support for those projects. There were some grants out to the federal funding agencies, again, around grain flour, grain safety. So those are some examples, again, not nearly all of the research that we're working on, but it does give you kind of a feel for what the department is up to.
As you said, it's a broad-based number of categories that you are impacting and touching, and some very interesting work. Dr. Silveroo's work I found fascinating because, as you said, is when you and I were in school, there's a kill step on bread. It's not an issue. Don't worry about it.
Right.
And as we've both worked in the area of food safety over the last many years, it has become a big problem and a big issue. And it's been really interesting watching the kinds of activities that are going on the milling side in approaching this problem.
Yeah, I agree. And it's a world, again, I have a soft spot for food safety. It's critical to consumers and critical to the consuming public. And it's a world where whatever you think you knew or think you can be sure that it will change.
Yep.
Those organisms evolve. The world becomes different. I had an old friend that talked all the time about unintended consequences. As you try to make the system better or products better for consumers, you create new challenges. And that is part of what makes food science so exciting, is it's not static at all. It's ever changing. And, you and I both could tell story after story after story where some of the stuff that I was taught, in high school and college and even in graduate school simply has been proven to be found not to be true or to be significantly modified by the scientific process.
Yeah, or by the way things are handled in the world today.
Exactly.
Things morph and change, and I've been listening the last couple of days to some of the IFT convention presentations and looking and discussing the way the food system is set up today. Is it appropriate? Are there things that we should be going back to? But that's a sidebar comment, but it is interesting to watch the way things are changing. And as you said, some of the things that we were taught back in the day are just either not correct or not relevant to the situation we're in today.
Yeah.
A question I had too, I wanted to probably give you a pat on the back if nothing else, but the milling department at K-State, and you guys put together a flour giveaway recently. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, we did. So all of us, as human beings have been affected by the COVID crisis. And, again, I went away for a vacation myself at spring break as the students were out, and I, never came back like everyone else. Nobody would have predicted it. Again, really kind of uncharted territory. And so as a consumer, much like both of you, I was met by the same things at retail. First, not interested really going around a bunch of people, number one. And number two, once it became, apparent that we had to shop for groceries, then the lack of what I could buy was just unprecedented for living in the U.S. I've traveled all over the world. I've been in markets where goods were very limited. So I had seen it before, but I had never in this country walked into a grocery store and not been able to buy flour or toilet paper or hot dogs. Or it's simply almost unfathomable. Really interesting philosophic kind of conversation where you go, just doesn't happen to us. But it did. And the kind of impact it made to our faculty was for flour. Again, I can't imagine there not being flour on a retail shelf in this country. And yet there was, store after store after store, you couldn't buy flour if you wanted it, not 5 pounds or 50 pounds. And so that is one of those things that we have the capacity to do something about. So we have a flour mill, much like any manufacturing facility. Not running for a while is fine. Not running for a long period of time is actually counterproductive. And so there's a point at which running the mill is good for the mill, it's good for the faculty. And so this kind of convergence of us getting the mill back operating and there being a need that we're uniquely suited to kind of address, and with the really gracious kind of support we have from the Kansas Wheat Commission and others to provide wheat and print shop at the university run by one of my buddies, Jason Ellis, and Ag Communications, provide the labels. And so there are other people who are interested in participating, allowed essentially 4 of us to run the mill to produce products. So as you might suspect, the mill is not set up to produce 10-pound bags of flour. So those are very small. That becomes a very hand-done process. So physically challenging, but nonetheless, we manufactured about 15,000 pounds of flour, and we distributed it to the local community with no expectation of how much we might give away. It could be 5 pounds or it could be all of it. And, in the end, we gave away every pound that we manufactured. We, in fact, we had agreed that we were going to pass flour out from 3 to 7, and at about 6:45, we ran out of product. It really worked out very well. I think people were pleased. It helped them understand, once again, kind of what the department can do, and we do value our place in the community. But it was something that we could do. We were also extremely well supported by the dean, the provost, and the president. And so the president came out and packed some flour himself, and then he drove by on his way out of town to see how things were going when we passed the flour out. So, again, I am thankful to work at a place where, these kind of faculty administration initiatives are so well appreciated and supported by the senior administration of the university.
It was such a nice outreach to the community at a really tough time.
Yeah, we appreciate it. It's, we've heard nothing but positive feedback. And so, it's one of those things where you take a chance and you hope it works out, received in the spirit of which it was given. And in this case, I think it was. So,
do you have a specific area of research that you're involved in at this point in time?
Yeah, so my interest has for a long time been really in a couple of areas. So years ago, when I was at Sara Lee, by a force of situation, I was turned into a food safety professional. So we had a major outbreak, one of the first E. coli outbreaks, Listeria outbreaks, in meat processing facilities, and that forced kind of all hands on deck and changed me from being a product developer to it being a Listeria, E. coli, Salmonella expert for a number of years, for about 3 years. And so it put me at the interface between the science and technology, the regulators, and the operations of large-scale meat processing plants. And so I think it's funny, people think about hot dogs, and you go, how hard can it be to make hot dogs? And you go, it's really not that hard. All of us could do it in our kitchen. Sara Lee wasn't making a hot dog or two. Sara Lee was making 1 million pounds of hot dogs a day out of one facility. And we had 5 of those, or 6. And so the sheer number of, volume gets to be kind of impressive. So I got to work at the interface. I got good at it. I got where I knew the community and understood the science. And that carried over to my responsibilities at ConAgra. And it also carried over to my interest when I came here. And so not just microbial safety, but also chemical safety. And so acrylamide is a process-induced toxicant. I worked on it extensively at ConAgra. It has a place in baked product safety, cereal safety. And so I remain interested, kind of microbial contaminants and process-induced chemistry as it relates to baked and grain products. And I continue to be interested in ingredient chemistry, especially protein chemistry. And so, as both of you might expect, my day job keeps me plenty busy, especially during these times. And so I have co-advised students. I haven't tried to carry a research program that was standalone. I haven't tried to carry my own students because I found the demands of being a good department head just don't allow the time that would be necessary to have the kind of quality of research program I would expect of myself. But I do have collaborators both within this department and beyond who are willing to have me as part of teams and to be on committees for students, even to co-advise. So I have got to do some of that, and I really, really enjoy it.
That's great. You had stated, I think it may have been a letter when you were first, or a little overview when you were first hired, but there's a statement that you said that you would like to make the department more relevant to students. How do you approach that question? How do you make this thing? I mean, the department itself we talked about the uniqueness of the department. We've talked a bit about some of the offerings within. What is the relevance to students coming out of that group?
Yeah, so there are two kind of related components or pieces to this. I would argue that we remain relevant to the industries where we provide employees, to the academics that we provide research, and also the industry as well, but our peer-reviewed research remains outstanding. Our ability to be competitive in very competitive money, National Science Foundation money and Department of Defense money, we still are very competitive with highly competitive federal dollars. And so, and we're certainly our students are still sought after by employees. We still have a near 100% placement rate for undergraduates. So I would argue that we're doing pretty good at being relevant. And I actually feel pretty good that we have young faculty who are just outstanding by any metric that you would use. Good teachers, good researchers, are publishing, are productive, are finding funding. Where I would be more critical would be not relevance, but awareness. We remain, after nearly 6 years of me being here, a much too well-kept secret. Really well known in a small circle, not as well known broadly, and it's a problem that's shared by many food science departments, not just this kind of more specialized food science group. And so, the challenge is, how do you make people aware of, first, that we're here, and secondly, of what we do, and third, about the opportunities that most of us believe are terrific ones for careers and for impact on society and for fulfillment and self-fulfillment is just a real challenge. And we have tried, and I know Maureen, we have tried and tried. We've had high school groups here on the weekends. We have a open house, KSU open house present that's almost unprecedented for trying to get people in our facilities and connected with our students. We have tried it big and small, one-on-one and with peer students, and we still have a great opportunity to drive awareness of grain science and awareness of, career possibilities and impact. And that, I wish I had the answer, but we certainly continue to try hard to unlock the puzzle.
It's a problem with a lot of really great departments and a lot of great broad truths, right? There's lots of people who do great things, and then how do you get people to understand it, and how do you get people to know it and see it and join you, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in a world where you have to be accepting of kind of the professional careers that these are, and so if your dream is to sit in an office and look at a computer screen all day long, that's really not what we're training people to do. And as a matter of fact, that's why I decided to be a food scientist, right? I had worked in a chemistry laboratory since I was a freshman in high school. all the way through college in a federal lab, and all the way through my master's degree. And it finally occurred to me that spending the rest of my life in a chemistry laboratory with no windows and no connection with anyone other than my peers might not be my calling in life. You know, the biggest joke was I go to parties and people would ask me what I do and for my graduate research in chemistry, and I tell them, and they gloss over and go, "Well, that's nice." And I go, "So this is going to be my whole life."
Yeah.
I pour my life into something that's completely unrelatable to anyone who's not in the field. And what grain science allows you to do is work on things that everyone, like it or not, bread is everywhere. And either you love it or you're afraid of the gluten, but you know what bread is. And I think that's terrific. And I think it's, you know, again, it's very relatable. Everything we do here, you know, involves working with people, involves working with your hands, involves using your mind. And it's kind of the perfect interplay of those three aspects.
I wonder whether there's some parallels, though, there are still, because, you know, chemistry is everywhere, too, right? So, you know, everybody knows bread, but everybody knows chemicals, too, right? So if you say, like, you know, that you're a chemist, right, it's a lot about the difference between what a chemist on a day-to-day basis does, right? Which is different from what people understand. And the same is true for bread and grain science and grain production, right? So the data, you know, what you're actually doing in terms of food science is still somewhat removed from, right, the product that people are familiar with. So, you know, what do you think of that?
It's an interesting perspective, and I would go yes and no. You know, certainly for industry people, and so it goes back to, you know, my mixed background is everything you do in food science and industry is designed to put a product into the marketplace, period. Mm. It can be great dissertation level science. It certainly have done dissertation level food safety work, but in the end, it isn't about the work, it's about the product. And I would argue in many things that we do within the department, again, Marina's kind of seen it, that there's hardcore science going on here that I could explain to a non-scientist and they would glaze over and have no idea what I was talking about. But when I said, well, you know, this science ends up in making bread that tastes better over time, or bread that has better color, or bread that is better for you nutritionally, then everyone could relate to that. And so again, I have one of my favorite organic books is sitting on the shelf above my phone, so I look at it. It's one that I learned a lot out of, and it's hardcore chemistry. And unless you're a chemist, there's nothing in that book that would be very relatable. But most of what we do here, even the hardest core science, has a tangible foot in practical, you know, products, processes, experiences of consumers.
Yeah, it's a general question about, you know, applied versus pure science, right? And everybody does some sort of applied science, whatever it's in, gets to, you know, the more applied you are, the more you get to say that you're working in, you know, for medicine or, you know, whatever sort of other, you know, safety applications or whatever, you can explain it to people. And the further and further away you get from that, the more work you have to do to explain things. And so you've got the application right there in the, you know, in everything you do, right?
Yeah, and that's and funny is, as you're well aware, right, is historically the more applied you are, the less real science you are. Is the people who are the real scientists, the nuclear rocket, you know, physics are the people who are highly theoretical. And as you move to applied, then people go, that really isn't science. And of course,
there at least historically has been that kind of view about things. Yeah.
Yeah, and Maureen and I thought that, you know, I would vehemently oppose that kind of that kind of thinking.
Yeah,
and you know, the bottom line is it's all science, and you know, it all works along the scientific method. It's what we teach our students, and what I believe, you know, with all my heart is, if you want to be a great applied scientist, then you better understand the fundamentals. And the more you understand the fundamentals, the better of doing applied science you'll be. And so this department, again, another unique thing is we have a feed mill and a flour mill and a bakery where you can practice your craft and you can use your hands and you can experientially experience, the science we teach you. And we have, world-class scientists who can teach you the fundamentals so that you get both, so that you get the basic and you get the kind of foundation, and then we teach you how you think about that foundational learning in terms of real life problems. One of my old meat experiences is we were running a product in a large manufacturing facilities, again, the hot dog story, and the hot dogs are turning green, like really impressive green. And you go, nobody's going to eat the green hot dog. So it's not microbiology that's causing the hot dog to be green. It's not some kind of contaminant. So there's not copper or, some kind of trace material that's making it green. And so we looked and thought. And finally what we figured out was the water coming through the pipes into the plants that was potable, that was for consumption, human consumption, had enough trace minerals in it that it was interacting with the iron in the meat. So the iron that's indigenous to the meat cells, and it was converting the iron pigment to a green color. And you go, man, incredibly, kind of complicated science to get to a very practical consumer outcome, right? Green hot dogs, not good. That's an example of it's the foundational understanding of the system that allowed the solution of a very practical problem.
Yeah, and there is something I was going to jump in a little bit ago and state there's something about, as you said, you spend hours working in laboratories. I spent many classroom times working in laboratories, and then when you walk out of that and walk into a bakery or walk into a mill, it's fun. It's fun to see that the basic science that you had been studying and learning is applied right there in doing things that will impact the population, that are going to feed the world and those types of things. So going into those labs, I remember the first time walking into the mill, I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And just seeing how it functioned and how it ran. And
yeah, that's exactly right. So, it's and it's something like we talked about earlier that changes with the wheat that you use and the products that you're trying to manufacture, and it's really quite a amazing spread of different kind of technical challenges, and that's the world that our students kind of join up for, which I think is just terrific.
And one of the things too that I loved when I was working in that side of the industry was the opportunities to get together with. There was one meeting I would go to every year where we had wheat breeders, we had millers, bakers, and consumer groups all in the same meeting talking to one another. And you never really ever get, at least before now, you wouldn't get that kind of interdisciplinary interaction with a group. The languages were always a challenge in getting each other to understand what each other wanted. But that was always such an interesting piece. And that kind of goes back to the question I'd asked you earlier on interdisciplinary and the importance of that. But at a university here, you've got the breeder sitting right there. You've got the baking experts sitting right there. You've got the milling experts, and how all of those things come together and interact with one another is within your grasp in doing research at K-State.
Absolutely.
Very exciting.
I love the use of the platform to try to get the word out, and having a philosopher involved is just terrific. It would be fun to come back sometime and talk about the philosophy of science, because I'd love to do that. I greatly appreciate both your willingness to do this. I think it's a terrific public service, and the more we can get people to think that, demystify the science. Everybody wants to think that science is unknowable. And that, of course, is ridiculous. All of this started at some point where, we knew 2 + 2, and that's about all we knew. And everything else I know about science I've learned through a lifetime, not from yesterday or from 20 years ago, but it's a continual and gradual process, and it's accessible to everyone. I refuse to believe that science is the purview of a few chosen special people. It does require hard work, and harder work for some of us than others of us, but it's an accessible world that's just, kind of a glorious one to be a part of for people who are called to do it.
You're here.
Very good. I'd like to thank you again for agreeing to sit down and chat with us.
Yeah, thank you very much. And if any of your listeners would want to contact me, the website is the best entrance way to there. It has my contact information and the way to kind of get in contact with the department.
If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, check out our website at ksu.edu/research/global food and drop us an email. Our music was adapted from Wayne Gowen's album, Chronicles of Carmela. Special thanks to him for providing that to us. Something to Chew On is produced by the Office of Research Development at Kansas State University.